Welcome, everybody. Some of you were with us when we presented this webinar about a month ago. We're having the second go around, and we've titled this webinar From Misaligned to Motivated. And Beth, you're going to keep us honest and let us know whether this title actually works for our situation. But most of what we want to focus on this time around is the experience that SALT Collaboratory has had working with Seattle Children's Hospital to help them reset, realign, and essentially engage their teams in their strategic planning process for the coming year. For those who don't know me, I'm Hannah Berson. I've spent a lot of time in consulting and in industry. I stumbled upon design thinking about 6 years ago, became interested, became an instructor, and about 5 years ago, I'd started my own shop, which is called SALT Collaboratories. And in terms of the work that we've been doing at SALT, 5 years, great experience helping clients with consulting or training or coaching, and feeling very fortunate to have worked with companies like Winnebago or Google or Schneider Electric. The common denominator between these clients in all these different industries is how to get their teams aligned and focused and moving in the right direction. And so what we're working on here, hopefully, will be relevant to what you do, regardless of whether it's in healthcare or any other industry. Beth, tell us about you.
Thank you, Hannah. So my name is Beth Bello. I work at Seattle Children's Hospital as the Director of Individual Annual Giving. I think a lot of the framework that Hannah is going to introduce today is going to be very helpful for a lot of different nonprofit organizations, specifically in fundraising. It gets your team to think larger and bigger in ways that you haven't before.
So when I talk to leaders, when I check to Beth and others, this is how we are wired. And we're always trying to do as much as we possibly can in the shortest amount of time. And the data tells us that we're not alone if we have a hard time doing this. So this is a recent article from Fast Company where we learned that 48% of all organizations fail to meet at least half of their strategic targets. 61% of C-suite level executives acknowledge that their firms struggle to bridge that gap between strategy and day-to-day implementation. And 47% of team members don't know how their leadership is tracking the strategy execution. So I just want to pause there, Beth, and I see you nodding.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about how you and your team were experiencing this kind of strategic execution gap.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that our annual giving team experienced last year was a little bit of a restructure. And we had a couple of new teams join the annual giving umbrella. We were seeing across our team that there are certain individuals who were just responding to a triage of incoming work volume and not necessarily taking a moment to pause and think strategically. It was really important for us to have a solid understanding of our metrics and our overall team goals so that no matter who is in the room, you could represent the team and be able to talk authentically and holistically to all of our programs while also having a solid understanding of their own work and metrics.
It's a bit of a tall order. And what we see is when teams are trying to do that wonderful, all together, we understand everything way of working that you've just described, they get stuck. Take a look at some of these more typical challenges that we see, wondering which of them are resonating with you. And Beth, asking which ones you thought were probably strongest in your experience with your teams.
I would say we had a little bit of stalled, stagnant innovation. We were so deeply involved with doing the work as it currently was set up and has historically been run. And our team was struggling to get to the point in which they could think bigger. We were having a lot of significant overlap between teams. So we were actually creating more redundant work than necessary. So it was a really nice exercise for us to see the full scope of all of the capacity across our team, where we're going this fiscal year and what we were trying to accomplish.
So we're seeing these challenges. I see them all the time. I started to look for fresher, more compact, more integrated ways of thinking about how to get clients beyond the particular roadblocks that they were experiencing. And I think if you're curious and you actually have a minute to lift up your head, you'll realize that while we were doing our work with our teams, others had come up with potentially better ways for us to work. One of those frameworks I've already mentioned is design thinking. And guessing that most of you, if you've heard a talk from me before, know more or less what design thinking is, but I'm going to touch on it just a little bit so that we're all on the same page. But essentially, it's a framework for innovation. It helps us solve these complex problems in a more innovative way, and it does it by bringing in human-centered creativity. So we actually learn how to work very closely with peers, with people from other areas of the business in ways that are new and much more connected. And if you look at the statistics, there's a reason why design thinking has had buzz in the market for coming up on decades now. We put that way of working together with something called objectives and key results. This is a construct from Intel that was passed on to the leadership of Google in the very, very early days of the company. Did we do it? Did we not do it? Yes, no, simple. That's a direct Andy Grove quote. But objectives and key results provide this very clear framework for setting ambitious goals and aligning efforts towards getting to measurable outcomes. It strips all the fluff away and makes sure that we know what the objective is, we know what the results are that we're going after. And you'll see from our story that it has many of these positive impacts that have been captured in studies like overall, 83% see it as positive, higher understanding of vision, of knowing where we're trying to go, higher employee satisfaction. We'll see that in some of our feedback today. So two really powerful frameworks that a lot of today's leaders are actually missing because, perish the thought, their skill sets are outdated as well. And I sometimes feel like our role is to bridge that gap and to help people work better and to have essentially better form, which is why I called this model of integrating the two PeakForm. And so what we'll see is that PeakForm is essentially a flow between design thinking and OKRs, where we never really leave one framework behind. It starts with design thinking, where we need to align on aspirations, make sure we're all on the same page, work with the right stakeholders, future state, current state. Those of us who know and enjoy design thinking will know that's very much something that we use our tools and methods for. The next one that we're going to do once we've aligned and we've got our aspirations straight is set the strategic direction. We want to make sure that we're heading in the right direction, we've got the right objectives, the right key results, and that we know exactly where we're headed and how we're going to get there. When we start talking, though, about how we're going to get there, we often find that the work that we're currently doing, if we come in mid-flow like we did with Beth, needs some work, needs some innovation. And so we lean back on design thinking to help us innovate. And once we feel like we have the program we want, at least for the next quarter, we make sure that we're measuring for impact in a way that is supportive and motivating for everybody on the team. Design thinking is how to get our mindsets into a more creative and collaborative state. And we're going to do it by being really good at understanding which methods to use for which challenge. The magic is in the methods. I have a few of them behind me right now. I don't leave home without them because this is what allows us to hear from everybody at the same time and be so productive. So design thinking is a keeper. So are objectives and key results. Who is new to OKRs? I know that a lot of people in the tech companies have been working with them.
I will admit, I'm new to this. Our boss felt it was important that the leadership team have a full understanding of what OKRs were, because if we were going to be asking our teams to do this work, it was equally as important for us as leaders to understand we needed to have a clear understanding of what these OKRs were so that we could be a resource for our team and help them feel like they were collectively a part of this whole experience from the ground up.
Right. And this is why partnering with Beth is such a dream, because she truly understands how to bring her team along. So in the OKR fundamentals, what we really need to know is that this is that framework for setting ambitious goals and aligning our efforts towards those measurable outcomes. And if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, they are down here, but they don't live in isolation. They exist to support the vision, mission, and strategy of the organization. So even though we're working with Beth and her team and not necessarily at the very top of the tree, you'll see how all the work that we did aligned directly with the overall objectives of the foundation that she's supporting. What are they? The objectives are basically, I want to climb this mountain. This is where I want to go. They're directional. The key results are going to be, how do I know I'm getting there? Base camp 1, 2, 3 over the next 30, 60, 90 days. And all of it gets done with initiatives. And really, even though we pulled in our design thinking and everything else, we needed to get Beth and her team to clarity around their objectives, key results, and initiatives. So let's talk about what we did, Beth. So you mentioned excited. Jessica, who's your leader, who definitely could see some challenges. You've noted them too. Tell us about the challenges you were facing.
So our team is very interesting at Seattle Children's Hospital and Foundation. We have an annual giving team, about 14 individuals, and we have probably 12 different unique programs that are all underneath our teams. We are oftentimes the first touch point for a lot of our donors in the community. So we have a high volume of donors who are reaching out to us to plan fundraising events, to facilitate workplace giving events, to do donation drives, all of these things. We have a very reactive work cycle, which unfortunately leads to a lot of redundancy. And while that's great thinking through a customer service lens for our donors, it's not necessarily the best for when we're trying to think through, how do we move the needle on getting from $8 million to $10 million to $20 million eventually, so that we can support the community. And so we really wanted to align all of our teams so that we had an understanding of who was working on what, how we could collectively start working better together and dispersing some of these programmatic elements across our team, optimize that reallocation of our resources so that we could start leaning into that strategic leadership capabilities, so that all of our team members collectively see themselves as being able to move the needle on any of our goals and OKRs that really impact our programs under the annual giving umbrella.
And touch on that last one, the strategic leadership capabilities. That was definitely on Jessica's radar for you guys.
Yes. So one of the things that is really important when we are thinking of the development of our program managers at Seattle Children's is the ability to start thinking through what that strategic leadership within their programmatic development, and then also with researching potentially new programs to develop, what that could look like. And so our team is relatively new program managers, and I'm a relatively new director. So this was really important for us to help us think through, where do we want to be in the next 3 years? Where do we want to be in the next 5 years as an annual giving program? Knowing that we touch upon the largest pool of donors of Seattle Children's Hospital, we knew that we had to think a little bit differently, especially as our populations are changing and as we're seeing demographic shifts within our donors. So we need to be able to respond to that. And the only way of doing that is to free up some time so that we can start utilizing those design thinking methodologies to be able to really think through those new innovative programs that are going to allow us to respond to the community and better support our patient families.
So kind of a tall order, Beth, when clients tell me they've got all this going on. Honestly, if I didn't have some sort of structured approach, I think I would get lost in the weeds too.
Yes.
And that's where reaching for these two frameworks that have naturally coalesced for me over the last few years seemed like the right approach. And like I said, we are working together on all of these phases. We're working together actively now on 3 and 4. But let's go into 1 and 2 for the purposes of this conversation.
Absolutely.
So I had a few meetings with Jessica. She said, we've got to start. These are the people who I want you to introduce yourself to and explain what you're going to be doing. And most of us know that if you come in with your PowerPoint deck and you tell everybody this is what we're going to be doing, and at the end of it say thank you very much, they don't really want to see you again. So I tried to think about how we could cover some of the content, but also start to give the team a taste for what our work together was going to look like. And in this particular example, one of the best ways to draw experience from people who have been living and breathing their work for months, years, however long it's been, is to use a rose thorn bud method, which actually comes from the Boy Scouts. And after introducing everybody to the work, saying to them, raising money is not a new challenge for you. You've been doing it for a long time. What's working for you? What's not working for you? So what's pink, what's rosy, what's not working, what's blue, makes you feel blue. And where are you seeing some areas of opportunity, some springs, some buds? And we gave everybody about 10 or 15 minutes to just sit and think quietly for themselves and do the work in the room, which is unusual in a typical meeting, right? Asking people to work quietly next to each other. And then we pulled it together using another design thinking method called affinity clustering, looking for the patterns, where we put the feedback from everybody into themes, rather than these are all the good things, these are all the bad things. And what you can see on this board over here is how a theme-like process might have some roses, but a lot of thorns and maybe some opportunities, whereas other areas like goal clarity, they certainly knew what their targets were, was a little bit more positive. So this was a little bit different, Beth. Talk about what this felt like, and then we'll look at some feedback.
To be very frank, it was very uncomfortable when we were first going through this. And I think it was just collectively felt within the room because this was new work that we had never done before. So we always reiterated that this process, it was a learning opportunity for everyone. And this was something that was new, and we acknowledged that to our teams. Like, we really wanted our team members to know that you're not showing up knowing how this process is going to work 100% of the time, but we're going to be there to help guide you through this process, and just kept reiterating over and over again that this really was to better our programs and to create the capabilities so that we could innovate and think differently about our teams, our programs, how we run our events, and how we partner better across annual giving teams. And I would say in particular with the rose, thorn, and bud and the affinity clustering, we found some really awesome themes that popped out of it that really weren't on our radar, on things that we needed to fix and stack hands on. And this really allowed us to take a step back and say, oh, we actually have some work that we need to do to make sure that we could hit that OKR that we're going to set, to really make sure that we're thinking through every single aspect of a new program as we're launching it this next fiscal year, and really allowing us to step by step identify what those good things were, but also where there were opportunities for improvement that we just hadn't identified before because we didn't take the time to sit down and to do this work cross collaboratively across our teams.
Right. And I think that experience that you mentioned, we always want to know, what did people like? What did they learn? What did they wish? Just so that we keep our finger on the pulse. And what was interesting here was seeing things like, I loved seeing the themes come together on the whiteboard. So many great perspectives. What you just said, Beth, in fact, this might even have been yours, of just so great to see everybody's thinking come together. I learned that the objectives are bigger and more aspirational. That was just from the sort of lecture about OKRs, of you're actually allowed to dream. You're actually going to be encouraged to think really big. And then finally, I wish we could do this with the leadership team, with more team members. Some people already starting to see the potential for what this could look like if we started to do it more broadly. The team was very thoughtful about how their OKRs were going to ladder up to the overall objectives of the foundation. So we didn't make them up out of thin air, we said we're working towards philanthropy, donor and volunteer experience, operational excellence, team of the future. These are the pillars of the overall foundation. So the next step was to invite Beth and her other leadership peers into a very deep session. We didn't have the rest of the team to articulate what they thought the objectives and key results should be for their overall leadership team. So how was that?
It was challenging. I think both myself and Katie struggled with, how do you think through what is the right objective, right? How can you be that descriptive, but also making sure that you're really setting through what that needs to be for our team? And for both of our teams, I think we had a lot of similar OKRs that were identified, which that was interesting from my perspective, because it allowed us to see we actually have more work that crosses our teams than we actually thought. And we were able to then identify areas in which we thought our team could have an opportunity to innovate. And we also thought it was really important, like I mentioned before, to really do this work ourselves first before introducing it to the larger team set. We really wanted to have a solid understanding ourselves so that as we facilitated these sessions with Hannah, we could answer questions, really encouraging curiosity and leading into warm curiosity so that people could ask any question that they may have. And we really reiterated every step of the way that this was a challenging process. And to Hannah's earlier point of productivity, we were doing this work on top of our standard end of fiscal year work at the same time. So there is a large amount of capacity that was being taken up by this work, but it was important work because now we're set up better for success this fiscal year. And we're already starting to approach all of our projects from a cross-team perspective that really is lifting up those objectives that we identified.
And I think we didn't go into the very detailed specifics of OKRs, but one thing that we did do to stay true to the model is not overwhelm. Yes. So we had one objective for each of these pillars and 3 key results. It's not about having hundreds. It's about being really clear. You don't want to lose people when you have too many. You want them to be able to stay focused. So this group really worked very hard to look at many options, right? Again, thinking for themselves first, putting their work together, seeing which idea they liked better rather than having a conversation and trying to come up with the right thing straight away. And they really did come up with their objectives and their key results for the overall group. The next thing we needed to do was engage their teams, because having everything at that leadership level is not going to translate into the work at the team level unless the team is involved. One of the most powerful things about OKRs is that the team is coming up with their objectives and key results themselves. This team is looking one level above and saying, oh, I see what the leaders want to do. This is how high I think we can jump to get there. And so at this next meeting with the donuts and the full team, as Beth said, she'd had an opportunity to think about this herself with her peers. And now we were able to bring others in to think about how they translate those objectives into those key results. And again, really important feedback, right? What's happening to how this team is feeling? We're seeing, I like the support my team shared with me, the collective goal setting, hearing ideas from everybody. There's a theme here that perhaps they don't always get to do that. The ability to have bottom-up input on our priorities. I learned I'm smarter than I think. This one person felt very insecure, and we encouraged her to just write down what she thought, and everybody voted for her idea. And she left feeling like a different person in terms of her relationship to her peers. They learned there's overlap. They learned that having an inspirational North Star is helpful. They want to keep going. They want to know that it's going to be supported, and they always wish they had more time.
What resonated with me was the sticky note under I learned that I'm smarter than I think, right? Like that to me is having my team members feel empowered in the work, empowered with their knowledge, We hired all of these individuals because they're brilliant in their own way and they bring amazing skill sets to this organization. So we want to make them feel comfortable to really innovate and think big picture in a completely different way. And to have that reiterated during a completely new learning process is pretty amazing. And then honestly, the we had more time, the I wish we had more time sticky note, that to me was a good thing. I think, as we're coming back from the pandemic and being more in person, typically we're burnt out after in-person meetings and brainstorming. And so we try to end things early, and to have a team member raise their hand and say, I actually wish we had more time together. That was a huge thing. And that, I think, showcases the impact that workshop had collectively on all of our team members.
Right. And now we're going to take your team members to a whole other place. So this is an eye chart, but if you think about where we are in the PeakForm model, we've aligned, we've looked at current state, we've looked at future state, we've gotten into a place where we can start to dream. Then we got very practical, came up with those objectives, came up with those key results, excited about where we're going. And then we have to remember that we're actually in the middle of our work, that we've been doing a lot of work. And now the question is, what we're doing going to get us to where we just decided we wanted to go? How do we take all the work that we're doing and map it to our key results and make that decision of whether we're on track or not? So here, what you're seeing is those objectives and key results that we did together at the leadership level. Now we're opening the kimono a little bit, and you can start to get a sense of how well crafted and thoughtful and aspirational these objectives were. Wanting to be the charity of choice in our greater region, and being creative and confident with Team of the Future, really thinking about how they wanted to get there. And I've taken some of the specifics out, but what the key results are going to be over a whole year to make sure that they're actually hitting them. And then the work here in the tiny font is that work out of that big workshop that we saw, where the individual teams looked one level above and said, oh, you want us to do this for philanthropy? This is what we can do in community giving. This is what we want to do in individual annual giving. So we had, after all of that work, stages 1 and 2, a really good idea of what each team wanted to achieve in the coming weeks and months. However, what about the current work? And so here we worked with Beth and her team. And Beth, you and your team looked at all the work you were doing, looked at who was doing it by color. Everybody was color coded. And the first thing that we did was work just with you and the project lead for the overall teams to map everything so that you could get a sense of how things looked. So we weren't going to do this with your broader team before you'd had a first pass.
Yep. And that was, again, Jessica and Hannah, to your really great recommendation, was what we really wanted to do from a leadership team perspective was do the work ourselves first, so that we could then help guide our teams thinking through this, answering questions, and really just helping to develop that warm curiosity across our team members. And so this helped me see through what was currently on my team's plate, what kind of the health of those programs were, and really just trying to think through how I could see they roll up to our overall objectives that we set, and just really thinking through where there were opportunities to potentially cross-team partner with community giving so that we could then elevate and raise that innovation bar across both of our teams.
Right. So the next thing we did, which is a little bit scary for all of the team members, you can see the color coding is gone now. Everything was the same color. And we had a conversation, right? You didn't tell people where the work went. You said, where do you think this initiative lives? And how does it relate to our various key results? So this took a little bit of time. Yep. We were able to map all of your team's work to all of the key results that they had come up with around philanthropy and donor and volunteer experience. And then we asked another question. We said, okay, which of these initiatives do we feel are green? They're great. We don't even have to worry about them, autopilot. And which of them are we a little bit worried about? That if we don't add some innovation or think about differently, they're not going to help us as much as we want. So that's where you're seeing good old-fashioned red, amber, green. And then back to the leadership. This was not done with a full team. Then we said, this is helpful, but how are we going to know what to focus on? Which of these red and orange dotted programs need the most work? So we went back to design thinking and pulled out something called an importance difficulty matrix. Out of all the red and orange programs that we had, do you remember this, Beth? We had to line them up in terms of impact first. So there was a lot, there's too much to think about. You have to break it down. And so this is a magical way of breaking all that complexity down into, out of all the programs that we do, which ones are the biggest bang for our buck, which ones are good, nice to have, a little bit lower in terms of impact. The next question was, oh, good, let's lock them in place. And now ask a different question. If we were to fix any of them, which ones would be hardest to fix? Which ones would be easiest to fix? So the hardest ones floated up to the top, and the easier ones were a little bit lower down in our matrix. And then magically, we had an idea of where to focus, right? That was when we overlaid the 1, 2, and 3 of we should start with things that have a high ROI, high impact, not hard to do. Think about things that are strategic or quick wins or low-hanging fruit, but definitely don't start on those luxury items when there's so much more value we can get from this work. So what did it feel like, Beth, to be able to see everything on that chart?
I would say the first chart was very overwhelming just to see the sheer amount of activities and engagements that we had. But then going through and overlaying it with the importance, that was actually extremely helpful. It really helped us identify what we needed to prioritize as a team this next year, where we really needed to take some time with Hannah to talk through some more design thinking methodologies around certain programs. And really it just allowed us to get a better understanding of, okay, if something really is a luxury item, maybe we consider not running that program this year and thinking about something differently, which is a completely new concept to our team. And that's something that our Chief Development Officer has been challenging us with. So I think it was just a nice reiteration of his message of, if something is not working correctly, that's all right. Let's think how we can do something different and innovate in a different way. And so I feel like this particular exercise really helped me as a leader feel empowered to make the decision to say, hey, I actually don't think that's a good return on our investment.
Exactly.
And really feel comfortable with that decision.
Right. And we didn't forget about those different programs that were green. We still had too many of those too. So we used a different prioritization method to say that these are the ones we care about the most. These are the ones that we like, but we should really focus here. But the document that is being laminated, that the team is walking around with, is the overlay of the programs from Beth's group and her peer Katie onto one picture, so that the leadership of the team and all of the team members can get a good sense of where the return is going to come from, where the innovation needs to happen, and where things can be left where they are so that the work can basically get done almost automatically. But this is, I remember Jessica, your lead, saying, I'm going to laminate this and I'm going to walk around with this because this is telling me what our year looks like, what we need to do, where we need to innovate. And in fact, it's exactly this chart that we've started to work on to pick off different initiatives like what you're calling peer-to-peer and celebrity ambassadors. That's where we're putting our stage 3 of the PeakForm innovation work into play, right? So this is, I'm going to just pause here because this is really the crux of all that work that we were able to do through stages 1 and 2. The other thing that we did that I won't go into too much now is making sure that everybody on your team understood where they fit in and where they didn't. So instead of having everybody swarm to every single program, making them be incredibly thoughtful about what the project is, what their particular role is based on just good old-fashioned RACI. And rather than discussing it, having them pull their own letters down so that we could see. What was that particular experience like?
It was interesting. So I was told by Hannah and our amazing annual giving manager, Lizetta, to not fill this in. And they kept reminding me multiple times because I am a student that likes to fill things in ahead of time. But it was fascinating. I had a kind of sense and understanding of where my team saw their work and where they thought their RACI responsibility, accountability, what their role was. And so it was a nice reiteration that I actually knew my team's work and that I had a solid understanding of where they were spending their time. And then also just naturally seeing across both my team and Katie's team, oh, we have multiple people working on this. Let's figure out a better structure so that we can be more supportive of one another and work better and stronger together than instead of doing duplicative work. So it was really helpful from a resource capacity perspective, and also just identifying areas in which we needed clarity.
Yep. And Beth was saying a lot of work that we've been doing together over the last number of months, on top of them doing all the work they need to do to raise funds to support the kids. So just very grateful for the time, but very focused on being incredibly productive in the 1 hour or 90 minutes that we get together every few weeks. So that's where we have gotten to today. We've mapped those initiative results. We've actually started to talk about assessing the execution readiness and seeing those gaps. And that's the deep work we're doing right now. In parallel, making sure that when the team gets together every 2 weeks or whatever, they're able to track their progress in a way that makes sense to them. If you're interested in hearing more from Beth and seeing what we're up to in stages 3 and 4, we have scheduled our next webinar on November 14th. If you want to register, I'll be promoting it as well in LinkedIn. But we'd be happy to go even deeper into some of the ways that we've been innovating and working together. So I just want to pause there, Beth. I know we're almost at time. I want to see if there's anything else that you want to say before I talk about what we could do together next with this crew.
Absolutely. We knew that this was going to be a lot of work, but it's already starting to have an impact in a positive way on our team. We're seeing folks come up with some brilliant ideas of programs and events and things that weren't even on our radar of something that we could potentially accomplish. And now there's a reinvigoration of this energy and of this just empowerment that they have ownership over our programs and have the ability to change things if they don't like how something is set up. And it really just has created some beautiful cross-team partnerships that we're already starting to implement in our Q1, which started October 1st. So I'm really excited to see where we go this year. And as we get into the innovate to execute and measure of the impact, I'm really excited with where we're going to be with peer-to-peer.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth, so much for joining us and sharing your story. And if anybody is interested in talking some more, if you're hearing some of this and thinking, this could be something that I could think about, I could use, I could help my own clients with, feel free to set up some time with me. I think it's important not to assume that design thinking and OKRs are right for everybody. I happen to think they have broad utility, but I'd want to test that with you. I'd want to see whether they could play a role in advancing the alignment and impact on your team. And again, for those who are new to me or our work, or even anybody who wants to stay in touch, the SALT Collaboratory website talks a lot about our design thinking work. There's case studies, podcasts, all that good stuff. But overall, just want to thank you so much for joining us and staying with us and sharing the story.